Welcome. Today we will delve into the events of the winter of 1944, when Europe's fate hung in the balance and the stakes were higher than just human lives. They involved the future of the world. At this time, German troops, numbering over 250,000 men, mysteriously crossed the Ardennes forests, preparing for the final major offensive operation, all amid rumors, internal sabotage, and dangerous secret missions. Why, despite resource shortages and equipment exhaustion, did Hitler still bet on an unexpected strike? And how could the preparations for Operation Greif within the German command have altered the course of history? At this moment, it was not only strategy at stake, but the very destiny of Europe. In this video, we will unravel the mysteries, hidden motives, and unforeseen complexities to reveal who was truly orchestrating this spectacle. Are you ready to see what lies behind masks and false signals? Then let's begin. The winter of 1944 arrived with a cold silence that seemed to foretell something ominous. Against the backdrop of snow-covered plains shrouded in a gray veil, one of the most risky and fateful chapters of World War II was unfolding. At a time when Europe was torn between fronts, deep within the German command headquarters, an operation was brewing. One capable of shifting the balance of power, cunning, daring, and at the same time desperate. At the heart of this story are the Ardennes forests, mysterious, dense, and dark, where not only wild animals hid, but also plans that could shake the entire world order. This was Germany's last major offensive operation, which was to be their final blow, a chance to break through the Allied defenses and preserve hope for victory. By early December, after the Normandy landings, Allied forces had strengthened and launched large-scale offensives across the front. Soon after their successful advance into European territory, the Allied armies consolidated, fortified, and prepared for new challenges. The Soviet Red Army, inexorably approaching Germany's borders, created a powerful Eastern Front, forcing German command to hold the line and think about the future. Meanwhile, behind the scenes within Germany itself, there were their own games, secret mobilizations, covert missions, preparations for what could become the last major operation. Speaking of the strategic situation, one cannot ignore the most critical factor: resource shortages. Despite all efforts, the German army was suffering from acute shortages of fuel, ammunition, and fresh soldiers. Equipment that once seemed powerful and formidable was becoming increasingly worn out, and combat readiness was in question. Time was passing, and with it, the opportunity for mistakes was shrinking. Hitler, a man accustomed to control and calculations, understood that he had only one chance: launching an unexpected, crushing blow capable of breaking through the front and buying time to strengthen positions. He believed that it would be possible to use the element of surprise to force the enemy to overestimate their strength and perhaps even retreat. Intelligence reports indicated alarming signs: evidence and rumors of sabotage operations, internal subversion within German forces, and secret groups infiltrated into the enemy's rear. Internal conflicts among German commanders were escalating, undermining trust and complicating the preparation for the operation. The German command was engaged in secret negotiations, covert mobilization, and reconnaissance missions designed to ensure success. Behind the lines, not only soldiers but also spies and agents were hiding, trained to carry out sabotage and disinformation. All of this created an atmosphere of uncertainty, where every detail could become decisive. The internal conflict raging within the heart of the German command was whether this worn-out, exhausted army, despite resource shortages, could execute the surprise attack plan. Could they, despite internal disagreements, prepare and carry out an operation that, according to their calculations, was meant to change the course of the war? The question hung in the air like a heavy fog, obscuring the clarity of the future. Because every step, every decision could be the last, for them and for all of Europe. But there is one aspect that lends this story a special mystery: the cunning and secret operations like Operation Greif. This covert mission, little known to the Germans, involved the use of special units infiltrated into the enemy's rear, disguised as Allied soldiers. They were to sow chaos, disorganize defenses, carry out sabotage, and create the illusion of a sudden, large-scale attack from unexpected directions. These tactics were not just clever tricks, but true art of warfare, where every move, every word could change the fate of the battle. It was this cunning that could be the key to success, or, conversely, the cause of complete failure. Could these secret operations, these hidden tactics, alter the course of the battle? Or would it all end in defeat, forever etched in history as the tragic finale of German ambitions? The question remains open, and the answers are hidden behind a curtain of secrecy, behind each new testimony and each new intelligence report. Because ultimately, in this war, this battle for Europe's destiny, victory depended not only on tanks, guns, and soldiers. An important role was played by clever calculations, the ability to disguise, the skill to play on the enemy's emotions, and to seize any opportunity for deception. And it was these subtle, almost invisible threads, intrigue, sabotage, secret operations, that could prove decisive in the final act of this drama, where the fate of the continent hung by a thread.
While some prepared for a powerful strike, others, against resistance, were developing their plans, hoping that their cunning and determination could change the outcome of this tragic war. After all, history teaches us that even in the most seemingly hopeless situations, the key to victory lies in cunning, unexpected moves, and secret operations that remain invisible to the enemy's eyes. It was precisely these subtle games, hidden behind the facade of ordinary combat actions, that could become Germany's last chance, a chance that might determine the fate of the entire world. In the foggy pre-dawn gloom, when Europe was still asleep and the cold October winds cut to the bone, one of the most ambitious and risky operations of World War II was taking shape in the heart of Nazi Germany. At a time when the outcome of the conflict seemed predetermined and the Allied forces were already approaching the final stage of victory, a figure emerged whose name would later become a symbol of cunning, craftiness, and reckless strategies: Otto Skorzeny. His persona is not just a name on the pages of history. It is the image of a man who, despite all difficulties, risks, and shortcomings, set himself a task that could change the course of the war. And this task was to prepare an operation codenamed Greif, an operation designed to infiltrate hundreds of specially trained German commandos disguised as American soldiers into the enemy's rear to sow chaos, spread disinformation, and undermine the combat effectiveness of Allied forces from within. October 1944, a moment when Europe's fate hung in the balance, and the last desperate plans echoed in the corridors of military offices. Otto Skorzeny, a man with a rich and contradictory past, long established as one of the most skillful and resourceful spies and operatives of Nazi Germany, decided that even in the most critical moment, a new tactic could be devised. His previous operations, rescuing Mussolini from captivity in 1943, and the Panzerschreck operation, which allowed him to establish control and influence in Hungary through Miklos Horthy, all attest to his strategic thinking and ability to craft complex, multi-layered scenarios that often resembled a chess game with fate. He understood that war was not only about the strength of weapons, but also about the mind. And if he could assemble a team capable of infiltrating the enemy's rear, it could be a decisive factor. The planning of the Greif operation began deep within German headquarters, in secret chambers where walls were covered with maps, and protocols, schemes, and blueprints lay on tables. About 3,000 people were involved in this plan, not just soldiers, but specialists trained specifically for this mission. They were to become shadows, disappearing into the rear, disguising themselves as American soldiers to use their own tactics, language, and culture. It was a risky, almost mad plan, to create an entire army of disguisers who, using only minimal means, would be tasked with destroying,
disorienting and undermining the Allies' forces. Part 4 of 14. It was necessary not only to prepare the people, but also to create the illusion of genuine American soldiers, to teach them to speak English, understand American signals, master their gestures and manners. All of this was happening against the backdrop of a shortage of modern weapons, equipment, and resources. The technical readiness of the operation is a separate story. The commandos had only 2 old Sherman tanks, which had long lost their combat effectiveness, and equipment taken from Soviet and Polish forces. Old, worn out, often non-functional. They used German vehicles but with American markings, allowing them to blend into the crowd. The gear included not only uniforms and weapons, but also a system of signals, signaling signs, and minor details that were meant to become their distinguishing features for friend and foe. Special signs and new signals were developed, and the uniforms were changed, all to create the illusion of real American units. The difficulty lay in the fact that resources were critically scarce, and time was almost out. Every day demanded new solutions, new tactical tricks. The political and military situation required speed, coordination, and absolute precision. There was no room for error. Any mistake could cost the lives not only of the commandos themselves, but of the entire operation. Amid this whirlwind of preparatory activities, the main question arose. Could these German special forces, despite language barriers, technical shortcomings, and moral burdens, successfully infiltrate enemy territory? Would they, disguising themselves as their opponents, accomplish their mission? Destroy communications, sow chaos, and disorganization? This question hung in the air like a heavy fog enveloping the entire plan. After all, every element of the operation was a risk. Every second was a chance of being uncovered. Every decision was a gamble on luck and professionalism. And, as always, an unexpected turn awaited on the horizon. What difficulties and dangers did Skorzeny and his team face during the implementation of this crazy plan? Which enemies proved stronger than expected? What mistakes were made in pursuit of the illusion of success? These questions contain the essence of risk, the secret hidden behind the facade of a daring plan. Only time, fate, and the unpredictability of war would decide who would win. The genius of strategy or chance. Who would write a new chapter in history? Heroes or victims? December 16th, 1944. A day that forever entered history as the beginning of one of the boldest and most complex offensives of World War II. A time when darkness and light merged in a bloody battle for control over the European continent, and the fates of millions hung on a thin line between chaos and strategic cunning. At this moment, when the sky over the Ardennes was covered with gray clouds and the frosty air was filled with premonitions of upcoming changes, Germany made its last desperate attempt to change the course of the war. The assault was sudden, powerful, almost invisible. Like a chunk of ice falling from the sky, it crashed onto the Allied lines from the south and north, tearing them apart, causing panic and disorientation. In the very first hours of this attack, German tactics revealed themselves in all their sophisticated brutality. The surprise offensive from the southern flank, where the Allied forces appeared most vulnerable, was carefully prepared, employing the full arsenal of tricks, from false artillery signals to camouflage amid uneven forest thickets. The deployment of Greif commandos, special units sent deep into enemy positions under the cover of night, became one of the most striking examples of German ingenuity. These fighters, disguising themselves as local peasants and soldiers, used false signals to confuse American reconnaissance, creating the illusion of mass attacks in one area, while the main force struck elsewhere. Simultaneously, on the strategic front, German engineers and saboteurs began destroying bridges over the Meuse River. These bridges, vital supply arteries, were intended to be the first obstacle for the advancing enemy. Their capture and destruction were not merely tactical objectives, but symbolic goals, holding the hope of slowing down and disorganizing the Allied forces. German saboteurs, armed with explosives, infiltrated enemy positions, striving to avoid attention, leaving behind only fragments of reinforced concrete structures and dust blown by the wind. In their efforts to maintain control over strategic points, the Allies faced difficulties. Some bridges were blown up prematurely, others captured and turned against them. In this battle for survival, even a small mistake could cost an entire unit's life. Meanwhile, within the depths of German intelligence services, a crucial game was underway, embedding spies and saboteurs into American units. These individuals were not merely fighters, but agents whose faces were hidden behind masks, whose names vanished from the enemy's memory as quickly as their traces disappeared. Their task was to create panic, spread disinformation, and sow chaos within command chains. Testimonies later surfaced during investigations showed that some of them had already begun their missions within the first hours, attempting to convince American commanders that key objects, warehouses, airfields, command posts, had been seized and were under enemy control. The evidence is irrefutable. Some of these saboteurs successfully infiltrated Allied ranks, penetrated their communications, creating the illusion that the entire front had already collapsed. Despite their training and discipline, the American Army began to encounter the first signs of this dangerous game. Occasionally, suspicious soldiers were detained, documents checked, small groups arrested, actions that seemed strange or overly covert. But some of the enemies, as subsequent investigations revealed, slipped through the cracks. They vanished into the fog, dissolved into the forest thickets, or infiltrated prearranged networks. The testimonies of those who noticed them, sometimes more than convincing, were cautious observations, strange signals, discrepancies in reports. Yet, despite these efforts, American commanders understood there were enemies among them, infiltrators, saboteurs who were already acting. Reports of attempts to capture generals, hacking communication nodes, and sabotaging strategic targets created an atmosphere of anxiety and suspicion within the command. Internal investigations uncovered and arrested groups, but as later revealed, these measures were only part of a broader, multi-layered scheme in which the enemy employed all tactics, from psychological operations to technical surveillance methods. Tensions among American officers reached a peak. Paranoia and distrust seeped even into the most solid units. Every commander wondered, who among them was an enemy agent? Who was a potential traitor ready to undermine all their efforts from within? The central conflict of this chapter is whether American forces can recognize and neutralize the powerful network of saboteurs embedded among them, or whether the enemy, like a shadow, will slip away into the fog, leaving chaos and destruction behind. The answer to this question is not merely tactical. It determined the outcome of the entire operation. Because the ability to notice the enemy in time, unravel the network of saboteurs and neutralize them, depended not only on the fate of individual combat groups, but also on the course of the entire offensive, and ultimately, the outcome of the war. But what lay behind all this? What unexpected tactics and maneuvers did the Germans use to confuse the Allies? What intricacies, what surprises lurked in the shadows? And how did they allow the enemy to play on trust and fear? In this realm of illusions and lies, where every signal could be a trap and every person a potential agent, the German command skillfully employed tactics capable of changing the rules of the game. And it was these unexpected moves, often unnoticed at first glance, that became the keys to victory or defeat. The question remains open. Who triumphed in this game of disguise, disinformation, and psychological warfare? The answer perhaps lies deep within secret schemes, in the intricacies of tactics, and in the stories of those who, despite everything, continued to fight for victory. In the shadow of the approaching battle, as the sky over Europe darkened with heavy clouds of war, chaos began to slowly but surely grow within American military camps and command centers. Doubts crept into the hearts of soldiers and officers, like poison penetrating the very depths of their trust and confidence. In a situation where the enemy could be hiding behind any corner, where every word could be a trap, and every face a mask of a traitor, the Allied team found itself on the brink of collapse. The entire system, built on strict discipline and clear commands, began to struggle with internal discord, with a wave of suspicion threatening to erase the boundaries between loyal soldiers and traitors. To combat this new internal enemy, suspicion, the American Army took unprecedented measures. Enhanced checks were introduced within headquarters, barracks, and camp tents. Officers who previously dealt with strategic planning and logistics now turned into detectives and investigators. The questions asked of soldiers became increasingly sophisticated, based on cultural codes, jokes, and small details characteristic of American life. What was the favorite dish of the grandfather? What song was played on the radio programs? Who witnessed this or that event? All of these became tools for testing loyalty. These questions seemed less like attempts to identify individuals and more like tests capable of revealing a German saboteur disguised as an American. However, the more effort was invested in these checks, the more apparent their limitations became. Major incidents arose within the camps, further fueling the flames of suspicion. Friendly fire, a terrifying and painful reminder of how easily misidentification could occur. One day, during intense training fire, American soldiers, mistaking their comrades for enemies, opened fire. The thunder echoed across the field. Blood and dust mingled, leaving behind not only the wounded, but also unspoken questions. How was such a confusion possible? Why did the approved identification methods fail? These mistakes exposed cracks in the system, undermined the authority of commanders, and intensified an atmosphere of distrust. Not only individuals, but also the highest-ranking officers came under close scrutiny. Generals Bruce Clark and Omar Bradley, veterans whose experience and reputation were supposed to be pillars of stability, now faced intensified investigations. Their pasts, connections, possible contacts, all became subjects of inquiry. Rumors spread within the command structures that even the most impeccable commanders could turn out to be agents of enemy intelligence. It was no surprise that tensions and even threats began to emerge among the senior officers. Not only external enemies posed a danger, but also their own circle, which could be hiding a knife behind their back. More fantastical rumors also circulated about attempts to seize key figures, about German agents infiltrating the highest echelons of command. These rumors, like a poisonous fog, enveloped barracks and headquarters, breeding paranoia and destroying the last remnants of calm. It was said that the Germans not only conducted reconnaissance and sabotage on the front, but also tried to penetrate the very heart of Allied structures to destabilize them from within. In this context, a particular incident involving Commander Montgomery took on significance. One night, according to rumors, he was almost a victim of infiltration into his protected circle. Meeting unfamiliar people and trying to slip through border posts all triggered a wave of anxiety and suspicion. Soon after, Montgomery was detained, and an investigation began. The conflict with border guards and accusations of unacceptable actions seemed only the tip of the iceberg. Internal tension reached a critical point, and mistrust within the Army itself began to hinder combat readiness. The atmosphere inside American camps, as well as on the front lines where the war was fought with brutal intensity, started to turn into a dangerous cocktail of uncertainty and paranoia. The entire system, which was supposed to unite, was now falling apart. Leadership faced a question that threatened everything. Could they tell their own from the enemy? Would they allow chaos to take over, capable of destroying all that had been achieved? In conditions where every word and movement could be the last, and every trust a trap, the struggle for control over the internal front line became just as crucial as battles on the battlefield. And in this whirl of suspicion and anxiety, the main question arises: can the Allies, despite internal divisions, maintain control and prevent the enemy from penetrating their weakest points? Will they be able to overcome the growing panic without allowing the internal enemy, not a traitor, but the invisible fear itself, to destroy them from within? And most importantly, at what cost will this salvation be achieved? What consequences, unexpected, sometimes shocking, will this atmosphere of suspicion and distrust in the very heart of combat bring? Time will show what lies behind the facade of this fight against the invisible enemy within, and what bloody lessons history will teach those who failed to keep a clear mind in times of trial. In the dark depths of December, when winter cold seeped into every crack of human hearts and the steel structures of the front, one of the most mysterious and dramatic pages of World War II was unfolding. Operation codenamed Griffin was supposed to be a surprise attack, relying on secrecy and daring, capable of shifting the balance of power in the very heart of the continent-rending battle. But reality proved to be much more complex and brutal. On the night when fate was decided in minute details, only a few managed to pass through the gates, break through the defense line, seize strategic targets, or strike at key communications. Out of 44 saboteurs who infiltrated deep into enemy territory, only a handful, just 8, managed to complete their mission. The rest vanished into the shadows, continuing their work in silence, hidden from the enemy's gaze. They are the invisible threads pulling toward destruction, chaos in the rear, destabilization of supply and communication. Their task is to destroy, sabotage, and annihilate, not in the spotlight of the press, not in command reports, but it was precisely their actions that proved to be some of the most destructive. At the same time, on the fronts where bloody battles raged, American troops intensified control over the lines, strengthened positions, and identified remaining infiltrators, trying to minimize their operational time. Evidence shows that intelligence and counterintelligence worked tirelessly. Every message, every report was double-checked. Every enemy movement caused alarm. Although a significant number of saboteurs were destroyed, some continued to operate, striking anew. Behind the lines, in the sluggish silence of the night, tragedies unfolded. Fire directed at their own forces, accidental shots, friendly lights flickering in the darkness, all testament to the internal chaos engulfing both sides. Internal confusion, mistakes, misunderstandings, all contributed to an atmosphere of uncertainty and danger. It was in such an environment that mysticism, myths, and rumors arose. One of the most vivid was the idea of capturing General Eisenhower, a myth born of fear, hope, and propaganda. Stories circulated about special missions, secret operations that supposedly could turn the tide of the war. But the facts show that these rumors had no real basis. In reality, Operation Greif failed to achieve its stated objectives. The bridges, vital for ferrying reinforcements and equipment, remained under Allied control, and the destructive strikes by saboteurs, though damaging, could not alter the strategic situation. The results of this military venture were both disappointing and instructive. Chaos, disorganization, internal contradictions. These had accompanied Greif from the very beginning. Although initially it was assumed that such actions could lead to significant changes, relieving pressure on main front lines or forcing the enemy to reassess their strength, the reality proved much harsher. The outcomes show that the strategic goal, which seemed so close and attainable, remained out of reach. The operation turned into a series of mistakes, misunderstandings, and tragedies. Internal confusion, friendly fire, missed opportunities, all contributed to the fact that the bridges remained under Allied control, and sabotage attempts were merely minor flashes in the overall picture of the war. A natural question arises. How effective was the infiltration strategy? How successfully did the Allies manage to counter infiltrators, identify them, and minimize the consequences? Analysis indicates that despite efforts by intelligence and counterintelligence, some saboteurs continued their work, sowing discord and destruction. Even under conditions of high secrecy, constant monitoring, and active combat, some managed to blend into the shadows, becoming invisible to the enemy's eyes. Their successes were not only in causing damage, but also in psychological pressure, in the sense of the impossibility of completely eliminating the threat. Internal conflicts, mistakes, shortcomings, all allowed the saboteurs to stay afloat, continuing to play their role in the broader theater of military operations. Although the Allies achieved some successes, their victories were more temporary and partial. From this failure, important lessons can be learned. The failure of Operation Griffin was not only a testament to the difficulty of infiltration and sabotage in the context of a large-scale war, but also a reminder of the need for constant analysis, adaptation, and the search for new methods to combat partisans and saboteurs. War is not only about the strength of weapons and the number of troops, it is a subtle game of strategy, tactics, and psychological pressure. The experience of this operation, despite all the tragic and chaotic moments, helped to understand that one cannot rely solely on secrecy or surprise. Future approaches required more flexible and multi-layered systems of defense and offense. The most important lessons are the realization that even the boldest plans, even the most secret operations, require ongoing adjustments, attention to detail, and, most importantly, an understanding that victory in war is determined not only by strength, but also by the ability to minimize damage, manage chaos, and maintain control even in the most difficult moments. It was through learning from failures that experience was gained, and this became the foundation for subsequent, more deliberate and prepared actions. At the end of December 1944, when the winter cold was already literally freezing the earth, when frosts penetrated even the thickest coats, when the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning rubber, and when the hearts of soldiers still fought with hope for victory, or at least for justification of their terrible deeds. It was during these days that one of the most extensive and bloody episodes of World War II came to an end. The German offensive, which reached its peak in December, gradually subsided. 30 days of fierce fighting, in which each mile of the front cost hundreds, sometimes thousands, of lives, were approaching their inevitable conclusion. Enemy lines which seemed impassable, fatigue and resource depletion, all of this began to turn against those fighting for Hitler. Fatigue was not only physical, it penetrated the minds of commanders, their strategic plans, and their combat morale. Ammunition and food supplies were running out, and morale seemed to melt away like ice on a river. Yet, despite these signs of weakness, danger still lingered in the air, the potential for new clashes. Because war could never simply end without consequences, without bloody traces. But it was precisely at this moment, in these last days of December, that one of the most ambitious and scandalous German offensives, the Ardennes offensive, was concluding. It began with fierce attacks and lightning-fast breakthroughs that stunned the Allies. The Germans, like predators striking at the most unexpected moment, created chaos and panic on the front. However, despite initial successes, the formidable tanks breaking through the lines, and the sniper fire tearing through the air, all of this proved to be only a temporary illusion. Analysis shows that despite the fury and despair, the German offensive was defeated. Fatigue, resource shortages, supply disruptions, and moral exhaustion all began to take their toll. Ultimately, the Germans failed to hold any of the key positions, and their offensive, which initially seemed poised to turn the tide of the war, was halted. The Battle of the Ardennes, which could have been a turning point, ended in complete failure. Although the first days appeared victorious, with battles filled with drama and bloodshed, the outcome was harsh. German troops were forced to retreat, and the Allies strengthened their positions. However, during this time, in the shadow of the fighting, a no less important but far more covert event took place. The capture and execution of saboteurs who violated international norms and rules of war. These individuals, armed and trained in stealth, infiltrated enemy rear areas, gathered intelligence, and carried out sabotage. Their actions, which violated the Geneva Convention, did not go unpunished. During bloody battles and trench confrontations, when the cries of the wounded mingled with the roar of artillery, commanders, with strictness and without any doubt, ordered the captured saboteurs to be brought to justice. And so, after thorough judicial proceedings, many of them were executed. This execution became a symbol of the Allies' toughness and resolve, demonstrating that such violations of international agreements would not go unpunished. Evidence collected at the scene shows that these saboteurs, violating the Geneva Convention, deliberately went to their deaths, blurring the lines between war and crime. Turning to the legal arena, it is impossible not to mention that these events were reflected in the Nuremberg trials and the Dachau tribunals. The focus was on a man named Skorzeny, a commander who, during the war years, employed tactics of disguise and stealth. Evidence and proof gathered by international investigative commissions show that the charges against him for war crimes are justified. But an important question arises. Were his actions truly crimes, or were they part of military tactics permissible during a brutal world war? Skorzeny's defense argued that using camouflage and covert operations was not a crime, but a necessity dictated by the conditions. Analysis shows that in wartime, when the enemy employs similar methods, such tactics are perceived as part of combat strategy, rather than crimes. However, in court, the evidence and testimonies are irrefutable. Witnesses spoke of numerous cases where camouflage tactics led to the death of innocents, of hostages, and ruined destinies. As a result, despite attempts to justify his actions, Skorzeny was charged with war crimes. But time passed, and the situation around him began to change. 24 years after the end of the war, when the international community began to scrutinize such cases more closely, a decision was made to reopen the case. In 1947, after a thorough review, he was acquitted. The basis for this was the lack of direct evidence that his actions went beyond acceptable military tactics. Analogies were drawn to the actions of Allied forces, who also employed similar methods, as proof. The judicial authorities concluded that in wartime, especially during such a large-scale conflict, the boundaries between military operations and crimes are blurred. The acquittal was the result of a compromise between law and the realities of war. But this was only a temporary relief. However, in the same year, when it seemed that everything was over, something unexpected happened. Skorzeny, a man whose name became a symbol of both mystery and controversy, escaped from custody. On a night when everyone was asleep, the guards lost sight of him, and he disappeared, like a shadow, dissolving into the dark streets of post-war Europe. His life turned into a flight. He changed names, hid under various aliases, participated in political life helping to shelter former Nazis, and then returned to the shadows. His life resembled a game of cat and mouse, always staying one step ahead of justice. His disappearance became one of the most mysterious chapters of the post-war history. And only years later, in Spain, on the shores of the Mediterranean, a man died, leaving behind a legacy that still sparks debate and discussion. His name, Skorzeny, became a symbol of how, in the shadows of war, not only crimes are hidden, but also people whose fates are intertwined with history. Today, decades later, only questions remain. Can Skorzeny and his team's actions be considered military tactics, or are they crimes? Where is the line between necessity and crime? And how did these operations, these secret and brutal acts, influence the development of international law and the memory of World War II? These questions continue to trouble historians, lawyers, and ordinary people. They remind us that war is not only about battles and victories, but also about the shadows that remain forever, and that the truth is sometimes hidden behind dark courtroom windows, behind the fog of historical memory. Skorzeny's story is not just a tale about a man and his deeds. It is a lesson that should serve as a reminder of the boundary beyond which crime begins, and of how important truth is in history if we want to understand who we were and who we can become. In the darkness of late night, when shadows merged with the darkness, and silence was so dense that even the beating of one's own heart could be heard, the image of an operation that was meant to strike at the enemy's heart appeared before the eyes. An operation called Greif, which in translation meant conqueror, a daring and risky attempt to change the course of events on the front, which ultimately turned out to be only a fleeting splash in the avalanche of history. This was not just a tactic, nor an enemy's strategy or a clever reconnaissance plan. It was a symbol of the era, a moment when wars ceased to be merely clashes of weapons and forces, transforming into a battle for consciousness, morality, and the boundaries of acceptable methods. Despite initial successes that seemed to be a loud testament to skill and determination, Operation Greif failed to change the outcome of the battle. The Allied forces, despite all efforts, held the line. Explosions, deceptive maneuvers, camouflage, all created an illusion of power. But ultimately, the reality proved to be harsh and unyielding. The facts show that, despite secrecy and risk, the measures taken could not break the strategic balance already established on the battlefield. Great strategists, authoritative commanders, analysts, all were forced to admit, even the boldest, most daring attempts are just a drop in the ocean. But what was the true strategic goal of this operation? What was its meaning? To demoralize the enemy? To sabotage their communications and logistics? Or perhaps to wage a psychological war intended to undermine morale and destroy the internal front? Analysis indicates that these objectives were present but proved insufficient. They failed to change the course of the battle or break the enemy's will. Camouflage, infiltration of agents, raids, all became examples for future wars and intelligence operations, sparking debates about the limits of acceptable methods. The question of how justified and permissible these tactics are became a hot topic in post-war Europe. Central to this discussion were scandals and court proceedings involving one of the staff officers, Skorzeny, who was accused of using methods beyond acceptable boundaries. The evidence presented in court was irrefutable. His actions teetered on the edge of crime and military necessity. The question of the boundaries between tactics and crimes became central, because in a large-scale war, where every decision can be decisive, defining these boundaries was extremely difficult. As a result, his fate and that of Operation Greif became symbols of the dilemmas that accompany any war. How far can rules be bent to achieve victory, and where do crimes begin? The final assessment of Operation Greif is not just a recognition of heroism or tactical bravery. It is a reminder that even bold and daring decisions are only a small link in the vast machinery of World War II. Time and history have shown that such steps cannot change the overall course of events, but leave a deep imprint in memory, lessons, and debates about the permissible limits of military activity. The importance of intelligence, internal security, and psychological warfare. These lessons became the cornerstones of post-war policy and international treaties. The war demonstrated that in the fight for victory, not only weapons but also minds, hearts, and moral boundaries are crucial. But what lessons can be drawn from the experience of this operation for the present day? What conclusions can be made about tactics, international law, and the limits of permissible methods today? The question is not only theoretical, it is alive and relevant. In a world where the boundaries of political and military ethics are increasingly blurred, and where new technologies enable psychological and information warfare, these lessons become particularly urgent. Time shows that the tactics used in Greif are not just historical facts. They serve as a warning, because just as they were justified and dangerous at the time, they can become equally perilous and justifiable today. Ultimately, a question arises that cannot be ignored. How dangerous and justified are the tactics employed in this operation? And how have they influenced the development of international norms? To what extent are such methods part of warfare or crimes? And could they become a norm that blurs the line between military necessity and morality? These questions demand not only analysis but also responsibility, because history teaches us that the boundaries of what is acceptable are not static. They are a thin and fragile line that can be crossed once and then never be the same again. The history of the Greif operation is not only a lesson in tactics or strategy, it is a reminder that in war, victory is not the only important thing. Moral choices and the boundaries that should not be crossed matter too. These lessons must serve as a warning for future generations, those who decide to play by the rules, or perhaps even beyond them.